to welcome our dear guests. It's not first time. General van Osch, Director General of the EU Military Staff, our guest and speaker to Security and Defence Subcommittee. We had three official meetings, but I remember also some unofficial meetings, working breakfast and so on. So I will not speak about your CV, but if anybody is interested, you have it in files. General is, I don't know when exactly, but is going to be in the end of...
It might be the last time.
Yeah.
I hope not.
Yeah, I hope not. So, but after a couple of years of your experience, General, it's extremely important for us to listen to you and share your experiences. We would like to speak about many things, and probably there will be many questions, but especially about the EU military missions and CSDP at all. And your point of view and your expectations. We are in the moment where everybody speak. I was personally invited last 3 months for several conferences to speak about CSDP and its future. And of course, everybody is concerned regarding the budget cuts and some misunderstandings or lack of understanding between all the member states and so on. So, General, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman, for inviting me again. I always really appreciate to be able to brief the honourable members of this committee. I hope you find it interesting, but certainly I find it interesting to listen to your ideas as well. At the end, we also need your support to make things happen, which I think are important for us all. I also am quite impressed by the initiatives taken within this committee with many reports, like the maritime dimension of the CSDP now by Mrs. Ana Gomes as the rapporteur, but also the EU's military structures by Mrs. Marietta Giannakou. I think these are new examples which help us as well to find the right direction in which we have to move. Now, in my short briefing, I plan to give some statements, short explanation, then make sure there's sufficient time for questions, and I'm willing to answer any question on whatever topic related to the military CSDP. But during my briefing I will stay a bit at the level of a more general level, what I think is important from my perspective as a general trend. Now, your question to me in this session was, how do you see the future of European defence? And then my first question is, defence of what? And many EU documents in the treaty already give an answer. It's European values: human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law, respect for human rights, etc. If I summarise, it would be assure prosperity and security for our populations. That is what we're here for, I'd say. Now, we military, and I've said this before, sorry for sometimes repetition, we are the first to acknowledge that this cannot be done by military alone. Many people tell us, but we, be assured, understand we cannot solve crisis alone. We cannot get at our objectives of protecting prosperity and security. So we need a comprehensive approach. Many of your countries do at home. In NATO, they always talk about it. Most of my career, I have been working in NATO and in coalitions of the willing. We understand we need a comprehensive approach, while at the same time, I expect that diplomats also understand they cannot do it alone. Neither can law enforcement agencies, development cooperation, humanitarian assistance, those who develop sanctions, etc., etc. We are all different instruments, and we need all those different instruments in a comprehensive way, in a synchronized way, if we want to be effective. It's also fair to say that in many crises we will need the military, because those crises cannot be solved without the military, like in a lot of other instruments. So with that introduction, my first statement would be a comprehensive approach is essential, and a strong military component should be part of it. I immediately jump to my second statement, which is the strength of the EU is the comprehensive approach. And I am amazed how excellent this already works, while it was quite difficult to start. We had a decision to have the External Action Service. We have the High Representative Vice President of the Commission heading it. She has the mandate, as you know, to coordinate all external action, and she does. I'm not saying it's easy, because a lot of different cultures, a lot of different services under different legal frameworks who had to start to work together. But what I see is a lot of evidence that it already is working, that it already leads to very good results, like in the Horn of Africa, like in the Sahel. And in the beginning it was backward planning, because for historic reasons we were not yet coordinated. But now I see, if there is a new crisis, the High Representative, Baroness Ashton, calls around the table all players, all instruments which are important for solving this crisis, and then we coordinate. Why should we be involved? We have better situation awareness. We can discuss what are the objectives and what instruments can we use to get at those objectives in a synchronized way. And I must say, and you can raise whatever question about whatever crisis where we now are involved, there's so much evidence that the sum of all those individual actions become more than only the individual actions together. But also, I've got a lot of evidence that military actions within become more effective itself. Nothing, I take water, thank you. I will not go into examples now, but I'm certainly willing to give many examples if you have questions on it. Then a third statement, and for me it's very important, because there are sometimes different opinions on it. EU is not only soft power. If you're strong, you can be soft too. It is not the other way around. And I fully subscribed, and I think basically everybody should, because all member states together decided to have and agree the European security strategy, but also the tasks for the military in the treaty. And I think it is very valid still. And I know it starts soft. It is military support to humanitarian assistance, SSR, DDR, evacuation of EU citizens. But it is also peacekeeping. And you do it under circumstances where the peace might be broken, and then you have to act. That is not soft. It is also peace enforcing. So you have to go in between parties who are already fighting, and also that is not soft. So we need to have a capability where we can do such kind of military actions. Basically, if you read both documents, the thought behind is the EU should be able to solve a crisis in our direct neighbourhood if those crises directly threaten EU interests. And I think that's very valid, and I would be in agreement with everybody who says, yes, but we also have NATO for that. Yes, but there are also quite some crises where NATO doesn't even put it on its agenda, and maybe that will even happen more often because of the refocus of the United States to the Pacific for good strategic reasons. But many of the crises we are involved are just not on the agenda of NATO. Somalia on land, not. Mali, not. Congo, not. Niger, not. Libya on land, not. But there are huge EU interests at stake. Then, short statement also on military capability development. There also, I'd like to say that EU does not duplicate NATO, because we stick to the principle that we facilitate, and it's both for my military staff and for EDA, we stick to the principle that we facilitate member states so they more efficiently can create capabilities we need, but they remain owned by member states. So member states still can decide whether they use it for EU, NATO, UN, or coalitions of the willing. In other words, everything the EU spends effort in to create military capabilities directly also strengthens NATO. My fifth statement. If we want the military to be part of the comprehensive approach, they should have sufficient planning capacity in order to plan in concert with our civilian partners. Strange enough, all my civilian partners have planning capacity where they can, in military terms, go into the detail of concepts of operations and operation plans. My civilian colleague who does the law and order missions and the police missions, he even uses the same methodology and the same terminology. But also, ECHO, DEFCO, they have their own planning capacity. It's very strange if we say the strength of the EU is comprehensive approach, that the only instrument within the EU, being the military, not has sufficient planning capacity to cooperate with them, to find the synergies. I each time have to ask additional augmentees. It takes time, and there where the military are the fastest instrument, if you look at the lower tactical levels, at the Brussels level, we're always slow, because or we have to activate an op center, which I think is a really efficient way, by the way, for peacekeeping kind of missions. But for the smaller missions, like EUTM Somalia, we didn't activate an OHQ because it is just ridiculous if we would do so, because it's much too big for such a small mission. But then we had to ask a lead nation to do the planning. And the first time it was Spain. And they planned in Madrid. But if we at the same time would want to do a mission, for instance a police mission in the same area, then the CPCC would plan it here. Now, that is not the most optimal way to do our common planning and find synergies, because a lot of things we need to do together. Logistic support, infrastructure, medical support, force protection. So it would be very useful if my staff also would have planners who then can, in concert with the civilian planners, work together and really become comprehensive. By the way, I am not asking, and many of you know, for a huge headquarters. It is not duplication of NATO. It is for the non-executive smaller missions where we not would activate an OHQ. With 20 planners, I could do a lot. Then, my sixth statement. In a complex environment, and let's be clear, the EU is a complex environment with all the different legal frameworks, different services under different decision-making processes. In this complex environment, simplicity, in my view, is the most important criterion for the way you organize yourself. Now, if I, from that military perspective, look at how it is organized in all member states, except two exceptions. All member states have a Minister of Defence beside the Minister of Foreign Affairs. We have a Chief of Defence who has a military staff to support him under different names: General Staff, Defence Staff or Military Staff. That's simple, everybody understands. I need to cooperate with those. I work under the political arrangement foreign affairs responsibility, also of Baroness Ashton. But Baroness Ashton also has me, so she is my minister. I serve her, but I work under the military committee direction, chaired by a chairman of the military committee, basically the level of CHOTS. And I am, therefore, also the military staff working for the CHOTS. If that simplicity is there and we stick to it, coordination with member states, coordination within the European Union, because most people all understand that comparison, communication with each other is easy, responsibilities lie easy. Every initiative which goes away from that basic comparison, in my view, would complicate decision making afterwards, because it will be completely different from what we do in member states. My seventh statement. At the moment, the EU cannot, by far cannot, fulfill its ambition, like all member states agreed we should. If I look at what we decided in 2008 to have the headline goal 2010, and then for 2 years we tried to get there, we never got there, and since 2010 basically we are an uncoordinated free fall with the huge cuts in almost all our member states, going up to 15, 20, some even more %. And many of the member states didn't have time to coordinate with NATO and EU where to cut. Almost all did it based on national arguments. And of course they look at where are the shortfalls, they try to avoid that they cut where shortfalls are, both in NATO and EU, but if we're honest, we have no clue where we are at the moment. Because yes, we get information, but as soon as we had information, new cuts were there and we not have the complete overview. That's scary, because we could not even fulfill our ambition, which is very modest. We want to protect European interests where it is threatened in crisis in our direct neighbourhood. Then I look at our direct neighbourhood and we are not able to solve them. So, what is then my answer to your question, what's the future of European defence? I still say it should be brilliant. It's a pity I have to leave, because I only can think of reasons why it should be, why it should further improve. And of course, I fully acknowledge also the strength and importance of NATO. Common defence, the higher intensity conflict, the really quick reaction, Article 5 is only possible in NATO, and it should remain that way, because we need the United States in. And because within NATO, with those links, only thanks to NATO, I can organize military operations as well, because NATO takes care of interoperability, standardization, etc. EU is not duplicating anything of that. We just make use of it, because member states make use of it. But we also have to acknowledge that for many crises, and I already gave some examples, we need the EU comprehensive involvement, including a military component. Now, what is the next milestone? And also the reason you have several topics related to it on your agenda. That is, of course, the European Council on Defence at the end of the year. I think it's very important we make the best out of that one. From a military perspective, what do I expect from this European Council? I lined up a few very general statements. I would like that the heads of state and government acknowledge the importance of the military role in the EU, linked within that comprehensive approach. Secondly, that they underline the importance of the EU's ambition, which I think, as the basic thought, is still valid, so that we should be able to solve regional crises if no one else can. 3, that for this to happen, the EU should have a modest military planning capability. 4, that they fully understand the huge gap between this ambition and the military capabilities of member states as they are now. And we will try to speed up our cycle for capability development, and the NATO terminology is defence planning, just to be able to come with information to the heads of state in December where we at that moment stand. Then logically, 5th point, that they understand that further cuts in defence budgets could be disastrous for the protection of our prosperity and security. We, I think, already passed the line where it is acceptable. And if we think we should protect prosperity and security, we have to start reinvesting. Linked to that, I think it will be valid, though we already have the tasker from ministers' level, but also the heads of state and government task us, the military, to act together and become more efficient with the budgets we have. Pooling and sharing, smart defence, that kind of initiatives are very useful. I also have to say, and that is best guess, it is not science, but I ask my staff to make a best guess, how much money will we save with all the smart defence NATO projects and pooling and sharing initiatives together? So, which will save money, because many of those projects will cost money because they're new investments. But first we have to save money because we have the cuts. Well, if I count all the possible savings together, we might save up to 300 million. That's, I think, excellent, because 300 million a year is a good figure. But I also asked them to look just at the internet, how huge have the cuts been altogether in the EU? Then it amounts around 30 billion. The cuts have been 100 times bigger than the possible savings. Because before you have a saving, you also first have to invest. Just a simple example. One of the good initiatives is to have pilot training together. Not every member state has its own pilot training. But then first you have to invest, in this case France, to increase the capacity of their school, infrastructure, etc., before you can move it. And by the way, then you not save all the costs at home, because the country who will then be the lead nation for that kind of training will ask you to pay for the training of your pilots. But it will be cheaper altogether. So we will save money, but the cuts are 100 times bigger at the moment than the savings we see. Then a bit outside my direct responsibility, but I do hope that the heads of state and government will also acknowledge that besides that also defence industry, like all industry, is important for jobs. It is also very important for the protection of our European values. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much.